County Market's weekly ad is here. Fire up those grills for St. Louis style ribs. Just $1.99 a pound. Pick up your 24 packs of Coke for just $9.99. Stock up on essentials.
This video may contain offensive language and be frightening to some viewers. Viewer discretion is recommended. The long road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to outstretch in front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the tall green trees danced across the windows in random patterns, every once in a while obnoxiously shining in your eyes. The surrounding was full of deep green trees forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of the car's engine as it travelled down the path. It was peaceful and let off a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked every form of nice for both passengers. The middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had neat short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. Diamond stud earrings decorated each of her ears, which partially showed from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which were brought out by her shirt, and the lighting seemed to make them more noticeable. There wasn't much significant about her appearance. She just looked like any average mother that you would see on TV shows and such. But one thing for sure made her different from those average mothers, and that was the dark bags under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy and sad, although she genuinely looked like someone who smiled a lot. She would sniff every once in a while, and occasionally glance back in the rearview mirror to look back at her son in the back seat, who was hunched over partially, his arms held tight around his chest, and his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked any normal appearance. Anyone could blandly see that something was wrong with him. His messy brown hair went in every which way, and his pale, almost grey skin was brought out by the luminescent lighting. His eyes were dark, unlike his mother's, and he wore a light t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided to him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and blood-stained that they weren't wearable anymore. The right side of his face bared a few cuts along with his split eyebrow. His right arm was bandaged up all the way to his shoulder, which had been shredded when his right side had hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful, when really he couldn't feel a thing. He never could feel a thing. That was one of the glories about being him. One of the many challenges he had to face growing up was growing up with the rare disease that caused him to be completely numb towards pain. Never before had he felt himself get hurt. He could have lost an arm and felt nothing. That and another major disorder he had faced was the one that deemed him many insulting nicknames in the short time he had attended grade school before he was moved to homeschooling was his Tourette syndrome, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control. He would crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. The kids would tease him and call him Ticky Toby and mock him with exaggerated twitching and laughing. It got so bad he turned to homeschooling. It was too hard for him to be in a common learning environment with seemingly every kid poking or more like stabbing fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window. His face was empty of any depictable emotion. Every few minutes his shoulder, arm or foot would twitch. Every bump that the car tires hit made his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name, and the last time Toby remembered riding in a car was when it crashed. That's all he thought about, unconsciously replaying everything he had remembered before he blacked out, over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one, when his sister hadn't been so lucky. When the thought of his older sister came, he couldn't help but let his eyes begin to tear up. The horrible memories replayed in his mind. Her screaming that had been cut off when the front of the car was smashed in. It all went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body. Her forehead pierced with glass shards, her hips and legs were crushed under the force of the steering wheel, her torso pushed in from the late inflated airbag. This was the last thing he had seen of his dear older sister. The road home continued on for what seemed like forever. It took so long to get home due to his mother wanting to avoid passing the site of the crash. When the surrounding gave into a familiar neighbourhood, they had both been more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their own home. It was an older neighbourhood, with quaint little houses all next to each other. The car drove in front of a little blue house with white window panes. They both quickly noticed the old vehicle that was parked in front of the house, and the familiar figure who stood out in the driveway. Toby felt automatic anger and frustration take over him at the sight of his father who wasn't there. His mother pulled up the car into the driveway beside him before turning off the engine and preparing to step out and face her husband. "Why is he here?" Toby said quietly as he looked back at his mother who reached to open the car door. "He's your father, Toby. He's here because he wants to see you," his mother responded.
At Papa John's, get an extra large New York style one-topping pizza for only $10.99. It's a mouth-watering, stretched thinner, made bigger, more for your money, extra large New York style one-topping pizza for only $10.99. Better get you some Papa John's.
"To see you," his mother responded in a monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. Yet he couldn't have driven up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died. Toby narrowed his eyes out the window. "He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive." "Yeah, when is he not?" Toby pushed open the door before his mother and stumbled out onto the driveway, where he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with a stern expression. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around to the car. His father opened up his arms, expecting a hug from his wife, but she walked past him and put her arm around Toby's shoulder and influenced him to begin walking inside. "Connie," her husband began to say under a raspy voice. "What? No welcome home hug, huh?" She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. "Hey, he's 16, he can walk himself." His father began to follow them in. "He's 17. Connie glared back at him before opening the door to the house and stepping inside. "Toby, why don't we get you in your room so you can rest, okay? I'll come get you when dinner is ready." "Nah, I'm 16, I can walk myself," Toby said sarcastically and glared back at his father before stumbling up the small staircase and turning into his room, where he slammed the door violently. His little room didn't have much in it, just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and his walls had a few framed pictures of his family, back when they were a family. Before his father became an alcoholic and acted violently towards the rest of his family, Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mother and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her to the floor, and when Lyra tried to break it up, he pushed her and she hit her back on the corner of the kitchen counter. Toby could never forgive him for what he did to his mother and his sister. Never. Toby didn't care how much his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyway. What he did care about was how he intentionally hurt the only two people he cared about. And when he was waiting in the hospital, where his sister took her last few breaths, the only person who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood by the window and looked out onto the street. He could have sworn he saw things out of the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed the medication he had been put on. When dinner time had come around and his mother called up to him, Toby came down the stairs and hesitantly sat down at the table across from his father and in between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked at their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. His mother caught on to his stare towards his father and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her slightly and looked down at his uneaten food, in which he didn't touch. In random patterns, every once in a while obnoxiously shining in your eyes. The surrounding was full of deep green trees forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of the car's engine as it travelled down the path. It was peaceful and let off a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, It lacked every form of nice for both passengers. The middle-aged woman at the steering wheel had neat short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well to the driveway.
I absolutely love using BetterHelp. Therapy just in general has changed my life. It's made
where he met his father's gaze before the back, which had been turned to her. I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me, I understand. But I promise you, it will get better, she said softly. When is he going to leave? Toby said with an innocent tone in his shaky voice. Connie let her gaze fall down to her feet. I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know, she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look forward at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed, before she leaned over to kiss his cheek, and stood up and walked out of the room. Good night, she said as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard the screeching of tyres, the screaming of his sister, and he would uncontrollably jerk in bed. He threw off his covers laying on his back, and pulled his pillow over his face and cried into it. He could feel his chest rise and fall as he let out each shaky breath as he cried. He could hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he didn't press the pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw the pillow off his face as well and sat up.